then secretly kidnapped and deported back to other countries, which is a violation not only of immigration laws but of human rights in general. We already know that they've had what they call popular rendition flights or people's rendition flights, which is actually funny that they call it popular rendition, because if you look at many Stalinist dictatorships, every time they did something that was a violation of human rights or whatever, they tried to make it sound revolutionary, like if they were doing it in the name of the people. So they called it popular this or the people's this. So it's actually very disturbing but funny at the same time that they criticize dictatorships like this in other countries, but they seem to be copying their tactics and everything, making everything they do seem like they're doing it in the name of the people, you know, the domestic spy programs, the persecutions, the secret torture, the invasions that they're doing that have no real president. They're just invading countries so they can take their resources and put in U.S.-friendly governments in power. It looks a lot like a dictatorship would in any other country. In fact, it is a dictatorship. It's just that people haven't woken up to that reality yet.
Well, what do you think about the everyday American citizen, such as myself, being persecuted? I've never spoken out against the government. I graduated from a top university. I've gone to work every day. I've paid my taxes. And there's a lot of victims just like me. Do you think it's because of the Nazi infiltration and that they're trying to rise to fascism and we're not going with the plan? What do you think that could be?
Well, I mean,
they have weapons, too, that they use on us. The microwave weapons. A lot of people are getting burned at night. They're getting heart palpitations. They're getting the voices, the projection of the voices. There's a lot going on, and death seems to be the ultimate goal of these stalkers. And I know my stalkers, I don't believe that they're government. They're airline pilots, and they know how to use this weaponry. I consider my perpetrators just flat-out criminals. Is it possible that there are criminals who have their hands on these weapons, and maybe they're trying to help overthrow the government with people who have infiltrated the government? What do you think?
Well, I would say that in a different circumstance, but I don't think the people who are carrying this out are from any fringe group. I think that they are people, agents of the government. I mean, the airline people and everything especially. I mean, who is it that's going around helping them to airlift people out of the country? There was even documentary that was even done by Alex Jones. Now, I don't 100% agree with the man. I'm not trying to make anyone who hears this feel bad because they believe in conspiracies or whatever, because a conspiracy is nothing so flat out wrong to believe in, because, the government we live in was founded by a conspiracy against the British Crown. So, is it really that unrealistic to believe that a government that was founded on a conspiracy could be conspiring to do something else? No. They've already done this several times. In Florida, they have the Tuskegee Project where they took black people and injected them with, I can't remember
syphilis.
What disease it was.
I think it was syphilis.
That's it, syphilis, to see how a human body would react, and they let these people die slow and painful deaths just so that they could see how a human body would react, which is another thing that's reminiscent of what Nazis did when Joseph Mengele was in the concentration camps. He carried out experiments just like that. So it's not unrealistic to believe that these things are possible. The thing is that there's so many people out there that sort of blow it out of proportion, and sometimes Alex Jones, he says something which seems too far-fetched or blown out of proportion, not because necessarily he's wrong, but there's no evidence thus far to back it up. So I don't want anyone to feel bad because of that, but I don't always agree with everything Alex Jones said, but he actually brought up some very interesting points on a documentary he had, which I'll send to you. I actually have the direct YouTube link to it. I'll send it to you.
No, that's great.
Message.
That's great. I'd like to see that. I love Alex Jones. I think he's got a lot of guts. He's out there. He's not afraid. So I find him very interesting.
Oh, yeah, the man has guts. No one can
no, he does, yes, he does. Well, what do you...
He has to be very careful, because one of these days, with the way that the government is going, they might end up kidnapping him, and if anybody says he disappeared, for all we know, they'll probably say, oh, he never existed, but when it gets to that point, be very afraid.
Yeah, I would be afraid, and it's going to be very hard to deny he ever existed because he's a very powerful voice and many, many people know who he is. So that would be a problem if he does disappear, and I hope that never, never happens. Where do you see this going in this country? How do you see this country ending up, let's say, within 5 years? What do you think will happen to the U.S.? Or to the world? Is this a global conspiracy? Will this be a one-world government?
Well, it's very possible it could end up becoming a one-world government, and I'll tell you why. Because, first of all, in this country alone, they're trying to, what most people call the New World Order. Mm-hmm. Other people, when they hear that term, they start laughing, and they're like, oh, well, that's all conspiracy nuts, but it's not. I mean,
I agree.
It's actually out in the open, only they call it the Project for the New American Century, and it was created by neoconservatives like William Crystal and everything, which one of the things it's set out to do is to merge every government on earth into one government. So there is a plan that the U.S. government has out there in the open, and even George Bush Sr., he talked about it many times. He said we have the chance to have a new world order where we'll have peace and freedom and whatever, but what's funny about this is that when you examine the plan for the new American century, if you take a look at anything it says in there, it sort of outlines a worldwide dictatorship and not a democratic regime and everything. I mean, if it was a one-world government that was democratic, where everything would just be shared by the people as a whole and everything, it would work. But what they've outlined in the new American century is a program for turning the entire world in general into one big dictatorship. There's nothing democratic about it. But anyways, in this country this year, or perhaps last year, they wanted to pass a resolution that would merge Mexico, Canada, and the U.S. into one government, and they would call it the North American Union. And again, media has not covered this at all, only the independent media, and only a few U.S. politicians have bravely spoken out against it and are fighting it and combating it. I mean, I don't think any EU government, North American Union regime would appear anytime soon, because the president of Mexico, although he's a tyrant himself, one of the few things that he does that is good is that he's totally rejected any form of trying to let the U.S. government take over Mexico any further. I mean, he is a pawn of the corporations, but he's not letting himself being bullied around like the other Mexican presidents, where they've let the U.S. government do whatever they want over there, including even send political prisoners across the border over there for the purpose of being tortured. That's another thing you're never going to find in anything anywhere. But, and plus the Canadians over there, they're a lot more politically conscious than anybody here. So even though they have leaders that somewhat wouldn't mind having a merge with the U.S. government, the people themselves have spoken out against it in larger numbers than anyone over here. So it doesn't look like anytime soon would there ever be a North American Union, but that's only a matter of time until the new president from either one of these countries decides that they are going to do it, and they start following the guidelines that the U.S. government has done, where they've taken powers that the Constitution doesn't give them, and they eventually do it. So right now it's just being put on hold, it's being stalled, but over time, if more resistance from the people of these nations don't become more evident, it's going to happen. And in Europe, they're trying to pass something called the Lisbon Treaty. You can find information on that. Just type in the Lisbon Treaty, and the only reason that...
That's in the European Union, isn't it? Lisbon?
Yeah, the European Union, but the thing is that the Lisbon Treaty, when right now the European Union is a coalition of different governments. It's kind of like a confederacy. Mm-hmm. They're united in an alliance, and they share some of the same currency and whatever, but they still have independent governments. The Lisbon Treaty would turn the European Union literally into one regime under the control of all those countries. It would be like the Roman Empire or the USSR was in Eastern Europe. So that's what the Lisbon Treaty is trying to do. The only reason it hasn't been passed is because the European courts over there are too independent for them to have passed it. The European courts, they saw the dangers of the Lisbon Treaty and they rejected it. But they, in fact, even in a video I sent you where a specialist was like going little by little with the Lisbon Treaty, he shows you